Hey, everybody. I am really looking forward to this conversation today with Caitlin Riggsbee uh, about how to take care of your mental health when your art and what you're making has the potential to really impact your mental health in a significant way. How do we take care of ourselves? Such an important conversation, and I'm really looking forward to it. Before we get started, Caitlin, I'm so glad to see you. Can you just give a little bit of an idea of who you are and what you're about for anyone who's listening right now?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, TJ. So my name is Caitlin Riggsbee. I am a Philadelphia-based documentary producer. These days, I mostly work in the realm of archival producing, which is sourcing and licensing third-party materials. Think classic PBS, think The Vow, which was a series that I worked on relatively recently. So yeah, I really am driven by finding the spaces where normal, everyday people and big historical events sort of like smash up against each other and seeing what ordinary people do under extraordinary circumstances. So that's me.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I think if I were a filmmaker myself, I would totally go in the direction of documentary film, storytelling in that way. That because that's just kind of who I am. I love learning about people, hearing their stories, piecing things together, connecting patterns, and all of those kinds of things in a little bit of a different way than maybe what we're used to seeing on the screen, which is more of like that narrative flavor of storytelling.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
but I don't think many people, I don't know, this is just like a broad assumption, I guess, but I don't believe many people when and if they are looking to go into studying filmmaking or photography or I don't know, writing, they necessarily have in their mind that, hey, what I want to do is become a documentarian.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking maybe more along the lines of, I want to work for one of the big production houses and like the big stars, right? And get them in front of my lens, and tell stories, which is totally awesome and worthwhile, and we need that stuff, but we need what you do as well. So maybe before we start talking about, the work you're doing right now and how you go about taking care of yourself, you might be able to give us a little bit of a picture into your journey as a
Yeah.
filmmaker and why or how you landed in the world of um, documentary.
Yeah, totally. So I couldn't say that there was one moment where I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker, but that interest sort of like came first when I was, yeah, in middle school maybe.
Okay.
And I actually I'm a University of the Arts graduate, and I first came to UArts during a pre-college program. And during that program, I made a little documentary about this group of artists who were building a boat next to that church on Broad Street.
Oh yeah, the broad,
Yeah,
it's kind of like the Broad Street Ministry, right?
exactly. Yes, that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was an empty lot at the time,
Yep.
and they were building this boat, and me and one of my other cohort, we filmed them. Had a great time doing that. And then but I still sort of assumed that I would be going down like a more fictional path. When I got to UArts, it's a really fascinating program in that like almost all of at least when I was there, all of the professors were documentarians,
Okay.
and I did a documentary in my freshman year about my grandfather, who was a Belgian. He was Belgian. He was born in 1924, and he volunteered for the resistance against the Nazis during World War II. So that whole documentary was
Wow.
about untangling sort of like family truths and like historical truths. And at the time, I didn't have access to a lot of paperwork on his
Sure.
his experience, but sort of like the stories you tell about your family members and sort of what they teach you about yourself. And I loved it. And I think some of the professors sort of like took me under their wing, thankfully, and were like, this one loves it.
We
And
found
sort
our
of
next one. We found the one that's
exactly.
going to carry us for. Yep.
Exactly. Which I'm eternally thankful for. And sort of from there, I started really exploring. how to make this into like not only a craft but also a career. Did a lot of internships. Found myself when I graduated working on Finding Your Roots for Henry Louis Gates with Henry Louis Gates Jr., which is a PBS flagship show, and has sort of been like in that space ever since.
Yeah.
It's it's such a gift to be able to, especially on that show we dealt with some really really heavy. Everything I've worked on has dealt with those
Uh-huh.
really heavy topics. But
I
like
mean,
one
well, in
notable was
school, you
mentioned.
started out like looking at your
Yeah,
grandfather and your family history fighting the Nazis, right? Or becoming part of
yeah,
the resistance. So your first foray into documentary storytelling was not the lightest of topics to begin
yeah.
with, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very rewarding to look, shed light to these topics that people don't talk about, to uplift, the everyday person and sort of like put their story front and center. So that's sort of just like the space that I've found myself in for like maybe a decade or so, which is
Mhm.
insane to think about that it's
Yeah.
been so long, because it doesn't feel like it's been that long.
Yeah. Well, it has been. Time goes really fast. And then the next thing you look up, we've eliminated 3 years of our existence somehow, and we have no idea where we are. So
Yep.
yeah, that decade is really fast.
Yeah.
And I keep seeing like promos for that Henry Louis Gates
Yeah,
project,
they're
and
doing
I'm like,
super
I
cool
need to
stuff with
watch
it right
this.
now.
Yeah,
It's just a beautiful show. If you have any interest in history, I still know many of the people who work on it, and they're really an incredible group of producers and
that's
editors and just
awesome.
crew. Yeah.
That's awesome. And can you just for me and my
Yeah.
curiosity, the difference between, or maybe there's not a difference, and you'll tell me, but the difference between, a documentarian or a documentary filmmaker and what you do as an archival
Yeah.
documentarian. Like, what is there a difference there? Is it a role?
Yes. So I consider myself a documentarian, but sort of like in my day job within the documentarian umbrella, I'm an archival producer. So what I do is I am hired onto a project to find and manage the relationships with and clear, which means either pay for or heavily discuss with lawyers, fair use options for
Right.
all the third party materials in that show or movie. So I did that on the vow, and that was an interesting one because it's deeply upsetting story. It's about it's a sex cult, and some man whose name I won't say. It's out there, it's Googleable easily, but I don't want to give him power like
Sure.
that.
Right.
Um, but this man who took advantage of people who were leaning into him for religious and self-improvement purposes. So that was an interesting one because we were, a lot of the materials we used came from the people who were victimized by him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's managing the relationship. It's dealing extensively with lawyers to make sure that we're not risking libel or defamation.
Yeah.
And the materials that we got from news sources or other third party places that we didn't have to clear through a materials release. It was discussing really heavily with the lawyers to see what we could clear through fair use, which is a legal copyright principle that says you can use other people's materials if you're transforming it or if you're using it in an educational way.
Yeah. So you're really involved in making sure that everything that makes it to the final production has
Yeah.
been vetted, has been cleared, has been talked about,
Yeah.
so that the final project is all kosher, right? All like
Yeah.
all set up and ready to go without any issue.
Yes,
But
exactly.
you're coming in contact with all of this material, probably in some of its rawest form, right? You're interacting with people who have been victimized, traumatized in one way or another, and talking about with either themselves or their representation, how can we use this really personal stuff of yours, right? So
Yeah.
you're hitting this stuff on multiple levels as a person, um, just coming in contact with it, and that must be really, really heavy.
It is, and it's also heavy to look at this stuff too. So not necessarily not just the vow, but the vow and other smaller projects that I'm currently working on. You see and hear atrocious things, and it's just part. And there's a level of sort of like a veil that sort of like comes over you.
Mhm.
When
Sure.
when you're listening, to a cult leader, you develop sort of like a filter for some of the things that he says, but some of it is deeply upsetting.
Yeah.
Um, for a little while, I worked on a late night TV show, and I realized that I couldn't keep doing that because these were unresolved issues.
Mm.
These were issues that were developing and that we were reporting on essentially, like
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
the moment, and
Yeah.
I was having nightmares because they
Really?
were
Huh?
yeah, because they were these were issues where there was no end in sight
Gotcha.
versus
Right.
the bad guy gets arrested. The person, I worked on a PBS documentary called The Blinding of Isaac Woodard, which really tragically about a African American World War II veteran, Isaac Woodard, who on the day of his discharge is the victim of police brutality and was blinded for the rest of his life as a
My
result.
God.
Horrible story, and
Right.
he didn't get his dues until 2020. And this happened in 1945 or
No
1946.
way. Wow. Oh, geez.
Mm-hmm. And but he gets his dues, and you hear from him at the end of the film, and there is a resolution, even if it isn't um, necessarily what we would want for him. There's a conclusion to the story. There is no conclusion to the horrors of lethal injection. you know.
Right, right. That is just like this ongoing thing that just keeps rolling and rolling and rolling,
Yeah.
at least right now, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what you're saying, you know, having the bookend there, the closure, the
Mm-hmm.
finality, maybe not the best version of that, but
Exactly.
something that says, okay, this trauma in the way that we've been looking at it is not taking place anymore, and I'm able to, rest in that reality. Like it's not just
Exactly.
this constant constant thing. But you talk
Exactly.
about um this veil kind of that comes down
Mm-hmm.
as you're encountering this material, and you're just kind of letting it go in your ears, and maybe you're doing your assessment of like, is this usable, is this not, does this match our goals and our particular perspective,
Mm-hmm.
is it telling the story in a holistic way, blah blah blah, right? But
Yes.
there's this disconnect or this distance that you try to put in place. And I think that that's a really normal experience for a human being who is in touch with trauma in any number of ways, right? We have this need to distance ourselves from it so that we don't um, encounter what we call vicarious trauma, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
secondary
Mm-hmm.
trauma. Um, Have you, like, when did you first notice that that was something that you did, that was a defense mechanism, to
Mm.
use like a term from my therapy world, a defense mechanism to protect yourself? Is there a time when you were like, oh my gosh, like I was here, but I wasn't totally here?
I that probably started very, very early on. I even back in my that first film that I made. Talking about my grandfather's experience and my grandfather's trauma. You there's a natural distance. um, Documentarians are sort of like, we like to get up in people's stories and sort of like
Yeah.
get up in their faces, but there is still like a physical barrier being the camera. or that being the computer when you're editing something.
Right.
So I don't know if I could point to a moment or a particular project where I was like, oh, I'm doing this sort of I'm here, but I'm viewing this through a filter, through a veil. But it's looking back, I think that's just always something that I've engaged in. Maybe not consciously. I definitely not consciously. Actually, it's something. It's probably something that I realized I was tapping in and out of. Actually, yes. Okay. To answer your question,
Okay.
I sorry, I had to go all the way back around in order to be like, actually, yes, I do know this.
So, okay. Awesome.
Working on the vow, I live with my boyfriend, with my partner, and he expressed like a horror at some of the things that were being said in the I was talking about what I was looking at very cavalierly, and he was like, "Whoa, that is insane. That is horrible. That is disturbing. That is disgusting." And I was like, "You're right," but I hadn't. And when you're working with a team of people, and some of these film crews are, at least on my end, some of these productions can be very small. I've worked on one where the day in, day out people totaled like 5, and some of them can be very large. But regardless of the size, you sort of develop like a gallows humor or a sort of like it's truly like oh, what's the phrase when you bond, trauma
bonding, yeah.
Trauma bond a little bit. So it's sort of it takes sometimes like an outsider's perspective to like come back in and be like, yeah, this is even if you're editing something or looking at something with sort of like a critical eye to the destruction of it, you still have to remove yourself, and it isn't until someone else from the outside looking in is like,
hey, this is intense, right? Or this is I mean, what was that like for you the first time your partner encountered your work in that moment where he was like, holy shit, that is a lot. That's a lot. This is what you're looking at all day. That's big. What was it like for you to be maybe like shaken out of that stupor for a second?
Yeah, it took me aback. It's so normalized, and a lot of documentary work right now is like true crime oriented, which is a whole other conversation about the ethics of that and sort of like what that means for our culture, for there to be such a huge interest in.
I will say that I am a consumer of true crime documentary, right? But every time I turn it on, I'm like, this doesn't really, there's a bit of like a dissonance there, right? Like, I'm thinking of some, recently within the past 6 months that I really got into, and I'm like, first of all, this is not like far away history, right? This is stuff that has happened within the last couple of decades where there are still victims and family members and everything who, are still themselves trying to find some kind of resolution to some of these stories, right? So to your point of, the ethics of it, it's something that I do think about as I still watch the work, right? But I think it's something that we need to think about. Anyway, that was a little bit of a sidebar, but go ahead with what you were saying if you remember what you were saying.
What was I saying? What were we talking?
We were talking about your partner coming in and like saying, his perspective with what you're working on, and it takes you aback, right? And you started talking about like, the true crime work that we're so fixated on today.
Yeah. So it's when I could relate to it because I've watched true crime. I listen to it from time to time, and there's a horror in it when you're experiencing it for an hour and a half, for 2 hours, for 6 hours over the course of 3 episodes, that diminishes with the exposure to it. So it really took me back. It made me question my morality or like
Mm.
humanity almost, like that I was being numb to sort of like the atrocities that I was
Mhm.
I was seeing and hearing and engaging with.
Yeah.
And it really made me question the direction. It makes me question sometimes the direction that some of the projects that I work on am taking. Not to like go too much into that, but you want these projects to be sympathetic and to be aware of like the full scope of the horror and victim focused.
Right.
In an ideal world, always victim focused and not
Yeah.
ogling at the
Perpetrator or the,
perpetrator.
yeah.
Exactly. So that's something that I've been trying to think about, like in my work and with the projects that I'm choosing. As my career has sort of grown, but also I felt more secure in it.
Mm.
The film industry is like a triangle. There's so many people trying to get in at the bottom,
Yeah.
and the stuff the mistreatment I accepted while I was like fully at the bottom, the low pay, the long
Mhm.
hours, the
Yeah.
abuse, I'm way less tolerant of it now than I was before because I feel more secure in my ability to say yes or no to things.
Yeah.
Not just, I won't take that rate but also I won't take that project because it doesn't align with my goals as a filmmaker or with my morals.
Right. Well, that is something that so many people come in contact with early on starting out. I mean,
Yep.
film industry, maybe that is one that we hear a little bit more often in terms of like the inroads, right, at the various, uh entry points.
Hmm.
But it happens all over the place where, you come in and it's like you have to pay your dues, right? There's a
Yeah.
requirement or an unspoken rule or even a spoken rule, where you have to just like take what is given to you if you want to eat,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
people leave their like values and their morals, at the door because it's either hold on to those or and don't eat or take the work and eat, right? And
Yeah.
it's unfortunately not until you have some seniority or tenure or experience where you can start to be more choosy, and that's a really unfortunate and not fair, but that's the game that we're all playing.
Yeah.
But I guess that's one of the ways that now you take care of yourself is you say, okay, like what is this opportunity that they're giving me? And does
Hmm.
it fit within my standards of practice and my values and my morals?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And also, are the people working on it? Do I feel comfortable with them too? Do I trust their vision and their ability to do this story justice?
Mhm.
Are their goals in alignment with mine?
Yeah.
It's film crews, production companies are so top down. A director can really make or break morale on a project. You don't realize it until you've done it a few times. And I've
Mhm.
worked on some incredible projects with some really tight knit crews, where I felt like I could go and say, "This isn't working for me. This is working for me."
Right.
And I've worked on some where I have not felt like I've had that
Right.
ability, and whether or not the end product, is regarded well, that I think I think you can do a documentary about a hard subject that is well regarded and isn't um, re-traumatizing for viewers and also for the victims.
Right. Right. Man, there's just so much that goes into, the thought process around everything that you're doing on a
Hmm.
project, right? From, how do we as a crew and a production, hold on to the values that we have and the vision that we have in a way that, you know, takes care of everybody, but
Yeah,
especially the
yeah,
victims. And how do we treat the victims in a way that, is honoring their their life and their experience, right? There's
yeah,
so many different layers to this, and I imagine it can be really, just like overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So what are some ways then that you, as an artist who's very focused on her work, um, day in and day out, when you're on a project, um, how does she take care of herself when you close your laptop, turn off your screen, right? Get off the set if you're there. What are some of the things that you would recommend other people in your situation or different do for themselves?
Yeah. So I have, as I've gotten older and sort of advanced in my career, I have gotten better about really strictly delineating this is work time, this is personal time. When I was younger, I would take work calls, work emails.
Yeah,
I would do other people's jobs on the weekends. I would like, yeah, because it's all about showing I'm
I'm
capable. I'm
capable. Yeah, I'm committed.
Mhm.
You want me on your team, right? You don't,
Exactly.
I don't want to be kicked out of this thing that I just crawled my way through, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you can have a 4-year degree, you can have a master's. It doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's like, how do you fit in? Do people want you around? What is your network, right?
Exactly. So I've gotten much better at being like this is my work time. I will be diving into this world, and I'll be shutting it off when I'm done billing by the hour, or when my work day is over. We've also in have the luxury of living in a house that has multiple rooms. So this
Yep.
is a complete workspace. I have The Sims on this computer, which is like my only because I don't have a gaming laptop, but that is coming soon. My partner and I have a different space where we can play video games
Yep.
and watch TV, and it's a smaller room. It's kind of womb like. I've realized very cozy, lots of
Yeah.
uh, candles and squishmallows and like all that fun stuff.
Comfortable, right?
Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
softer. Hmm.
Exactly. And sometimes I'll let myself work in different parts of the house if I particularly need to just like be in bed, which isn't professional, but I work from home, so it's fine. So I sort of just like allow myself to like be in a space where I feel comfortable and safe. And I let myself, again, like as time has gone on, deprioritize the speed, and prioritize myself. So like part of what I do is as I'm bringing in these chunks of material, I'm sort of like the first line for the editor.
Hmm.
So what I do, I get like an hour long clip. I have to watch that hour long clip,
Right.
and I'm making notes.
Yeah.
Main character says that I'm transcribing, things
Yeah.
that strike me as interesting. And for a long time, I thought I was going to be an editor. So trying to look at those things like an editor would, what sounds are interesting, what visuals are interesting, what's the dynamic that you can see or hear,
Right. So
sort of
you're
in the
really like
clip.
intensely using your senses, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, throughout that process, which is different than just like turning on the file, running the file, and just having it like play in the background. It's not what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
doing. You are
yeah.
very focused, and so whatever is in that clip, or you know, uh, in those pictures, you're there. So
I'm
that's,
processing it.
yeah,
Yeah, fully, and trying to note it so that if if even like a silly request comes in, like I need the main character wearing blue shoes, I can do
a
a
search.
search and find that file. I'm trying to process as much information as possible so that we can save ourselves on the back end. Um, so I allow myself to take more breaks, especially if something is really upsetting, and it makes me slower, but I think that actually with these projects, um, allowing yourself to be moved by particular things, allowing yourself to be impacted makes for a better end product.
Sure.
because I could sit here and I could type, you know, like main character says XYZ, but it's it's better for everyone to be like this moment right here took me aback. This moment like
Right.
caused the reaction in me.
Right.
If that's the story that we're trying to tell, if that's the emotional hook that we're going for.
Right. Well,
Um,
that's your humanity, that's your empathy.
mhm,
And if we strip that away, it it becomes robotic, not without feeling, all of those things. And that, to go back to, you know, your one defense
yeah,
mechanism, right, of separating yourself away, that's really important for a number of reasons, but this sense of allowing yourself to experience all of the emotion that comes with seeing things like this, having people's lives be impacted in front of you, that is a really important piece of processing as well, right?
yeah,
And whether you're able to do that on your own because of your own awareness and insight and just emotional ability, or you need to go and get, you know, professional help weekly or whenever, that's a really important thing for you to, for you as in everybody, to do,
hmm,
because our bodies hold on to all of this stuff. And
yeah,
until we work it out either through exercise, physical movement, other kinds of somatic processes in therapy, reprocessing the trauma that we see and experience, it's just going to stay with us. So allowing yourself to get up and walk away, to shut off for a little while, to allow yourself to actually cry, if
hmm,
that is what you need to do, or laugh if for whatever reason that is what is going on, right? That is so important.
yeah,
And to
yeah,
say, I'm experiencing this not in the same way that these characters or people have experienced it, but I'm still a human being who is now engaging and interacting with this experience, and I'm going to therefore experience it myself, right?
exactly,
And you need to
exactly.
take care of yourself in so many, in any way that makes sense for you. Right.
Exactly. And one of the other my boyfriend has been really instrumental with this. He is a huge empath. And I think that I do engage a little bit more in some, you know, keeping that stuff at arm's length.
Mhm.
But again, like this is not a privilege I had when I was earlier on in my career, but I try to take advantage of it now. I try to give myself regular time off. This
Yeah.
is gig work. So, you know, often, you know, you have to move on to the next thing. But I rolled from one like highly traumatic project into one that was way less, you know, was a lot more fun. But when I wrapped off of that one, I took I think a month off,
Mhm.
which you know financially a little bit stressful, you know, but
Yeah.
mental health wise way
So
easier. Like
important.
I recovered so much in that time. I hadn't even realized like how much stress I was holding on to,
Right.
and you know, and now doing a lot more, a lot of archival producing work, I tend to pop onto projects and pop off, which I think has been better for me. You know, you live in a world for 5 weeks, and then maybe you do it part time, so you have a day off in the middle of the
Mhm.
week to sort of
Mhm.
recuperate, or you know maybe you take a 2 week break before you go on to the next thing. It's a little bit more touch and go versus the projects I was working on before where it was a year straight, a year and a half straight of
Right.
just
Where you're just fully
living.
immersed in heaviness. Mhm.
Exactly,
Yeah, I
exactly.
think that that's really good advice and insight. Um, Maybe you don't have the ability to totally like shut off and not take work after whatever you're doing right now.
Yeah,
But thinking through and planning, right, the types of projects, how many of these types of projects can I physically, emotionally, mentally handle in a year? And
yeah,
what are things that I can supplement with between those projects, right? So
Yeah.
you go from something that is maybe really heavy, and if you can't take time off, you take a contract that is on a project that is more lighthearted or not as intense, right? So that you
Yeah.
allow yourself to decompress and to remember that, oh, there's better stuff in life than all of this like insanity that people, put on to other people, right? Like
Yeah.
pacing yourself is really important. That's what I do when I work with people. I have some really intense clients,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then because my work is like hour by hour often, right? I schedule my day so I have a really intense client, and then I have some clients that don't require as much from me.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just helps to not burn me out, because burnout is legitimate when you're so involved in people's lives. And I imagine that that's similar in ways to you when you're consuming all of this material.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think I had time off for 2 years. I just rolled from one to the next to the next, and by the time I got to the end of it, I was like, I have to stop.
I have to stop. I have to do something different, right? I
Yeah,
have to.
yeah. And my
Yeah.
boyfriend was like, you can't do this. You can't keep doing this.
Yeah, he's like,
This is
yeah.
disruptive.
He's like, yeah, you do. You need to stop. You need to slow down. You need to do something different.
Yeah,
Right. And that's
yeah,
another thing that I talk to people about all of the time too, or not all of the time because that's a lot of time, but often I will talk to people about, it's okay to realize when you've had enough, right?
yeah,
When you've done enough of this. You're not a failure. You're not someone who can't take it. You're not whatever judgment you might place on yourself or believe others are placing on yourself when you say, you know what, I need to do something completely different right now, right? I
yeah,
can't even maybe work in the industry right now. I'm going to take a sabbatical, right,
yeah,
from this work, and maybe I'll do something adjacent to it, or maybe I'll go and like pour coffee for people for a little while, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because it's more important at the end of the day that you remain standing and alive than, being just constantly beaten down by
yeah,
the intensity of the work. And that is okay too. That is another way that we can take care of ourselves.
yeah,
It's a hard thing to realize and to get to the point of saying, because we like to all think that we can keep taking it, we can keep doing this work is important, right? I'm contributing to making society better or more informed or whatever. um, but there are other people who will also do that, right, while you take a step back.
yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah,
you can always re-enter, at another point. um,
yeah,
So before we wrap up, this has been a really great conversation, and I think it gives people a lot of stuff to chew on in terms of like, okay, so I'm doing really intense work. How can I take
hmm
care of myself? Or maybe I'm not alone in feeling overwhelmed and, needing a break, because Caitlin has also experienced this, right? That is really important. But maybe you can just talk for a minute or two about how someone, like, just like think back to your younger self, who's like thinking about art school and thinking about getting into storytelling. um,
mm,
what are some things that younger emerging artists um, might do to prepare themselves for, the grind and being at the bottom kind of that heap of people trying to break in?
that's a great question. It's so difficult because I don't know if I would do anything differently necessarily. I feel so thankful for the experiences I had, for the internships and the people that I met, because they built up my community. But I guess that's it. I was lucky enough to be able to, even while I was working like an absolute lunatic and not getting paid enough,
Yeah.
within that I had experiences of like true mentorship and community. So
Mm,
I think my advice to my younger self is you should take as many opportunities as you can, but use that to sort of like suss out the people who will help grow you and help not just advance, but like as a creative, but also just like as a person.
as a person,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I gave a lot of people, you know, my time and my effort, and those were incredible experiences, but not all of them. They didn't all have more benefit than harm, you know.
Right.
And the ones that did, those ones, there's still people who are in my life. There's still people who I can shoot an email to. There's still people who I put on as references for me. Those are relationships that I've cultivated. So you have to trust your gut. There were some interviews I walked into and I was like, I don't know about this, and I still went through with it. And I don't know if it benefited me
Yeah.
necessarily. It didn't hurt me
Right.
necessarily, but it didn't help me find my voice. It didn't
Hmm.
necessarily help me find my, like, I mean, that as a person, but also as a creative. And it didn't help me find my community.
Right.
So, you look at the world, find all the people, but you have to develop a strong sense of just like gut, like, is this person
Yeah.
good for me? Is this
Yeah.
person's creative practice something that I admire, or am I getting like a sense that maybe they have different interests or goals than I do? And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily like a bad person, but that just
Right.
means
Sure.
that you don't have to
Sure.
be in creative practice with them.
Sure. Well, there's a
I
difference.
found. Mhm.
There's a difference between taking work that isn't ideal or what you want to do, but it will still help you along the way, right?
Yeah.
And a difference, there's a difference to that with taking work that is just bad news, right? That is
Yeah.
just not going to help you. You're not going to get anything in return for it. You might even be harmed in some way.
Yeah.
um there's a difference, because as a young person, as a young I can't believe I said that. I'm getting so old, by the way. As a young person, you're going to have to take work that
Mhm.
isn't like your dream job, and that is
Yeah.
that is this is a reality
Yeah.
of it. But it doesn't mean that it's worth less work. It is work that is going to help you
Mhm.
develop that gut, develop that intuition to know, this is work that will help build my network, will help teach me how to be a better creative, will get me to the next step,
Yeah.
versus this is work that is going to chew me up and eat me alive
Yeah.
and just beat me down, or whatever else it can do, right?
Yeah.
um
Exactly.
but yeah, so I hear what you're saying. Develop that gut, develop your intuition, learn to listen to it, learn to trust
Yeah.
it, um, and focus not only on becoming a better creative or a better artist, but also find people who are going to help you become a better human being, because ultimately that will inform your creative practice,
Yeah.
as well as just helping you live in the world in a better way, in a way that's more
Yeah.
meaningful. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Awesome. Caitlin, thank you so much for this conversation. It was so fun talking to you. I
Yeah.
love reconnecting with, I should just really honestly call this like the UArts alum podcast, because I find that I always go home to my UArts, University of the Arts roots, and find people. But I don't think it's just because like I have like this phobia of leaving the nest, but UArts really does create really impactful artists and
Yeah.
creatives who are doing so many amazing things in the world, to make it a better place, to make it a more interesting place. And you
Yeah.
are one of those people.
Thank you.
And I'm definitely going to go search out all of your work on PBS. And maybe I need to like actually use my passport membership that I have. I don't know.
It's worth it.
I'm like, what passport? They keep telling me about this thing, and I should actually maybe log into it. But anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, TJ. It's been great.
You're welcome. Everybody, this has been the Bold Creatives Collective podcast. I love bringing these things to y'all, and I look forward to the next time that we can hang out. Talk to you soon.